Hey, this is Dr. Drew, and today I'm going to talk to you about high blood sugar and diabetes. Now, this is absolutely one of the epidemics that is sweeping the nation and affecting more North Americans than just about any other disease. And the big thing with diabetes is it leads to a lot of other stuff. So it's not just the diagnosis that's a challenge, it's the fallout and the side effects of long-term blood sugar issues. Some of the main areas that are affected if you don't get this under control is the eyes, the nerves, and the kidneys. Because when the glucose levels go up, those glucose molecules can preferentially enter into those tissues and gum them up. Just think of glue and it gluing things in the area. So it can cause blindness and long-term kidney damage and peripheral neuropathy and tingling. And then you're way more likely to have a heart attack if you don't keep your blood sugar under control, because it leads to plaquing of the arteries in the heart. So as you can see, it's not that diabetes usually gets people, it's these other things it leads to that gets you down the road. So if you have it in the family or there's predisposition to it, I always like to remind people you're a victim of your habits, not your genes. And there's lots you can do to turn the ship around if there's prediabetes or diabetes going on. There are many stories of people reversing and eliminating type 2 diabetes. So diagnosis or not, or if you're just in a state right now where you really want to learn more and prevent, then this information is going to be awesome for you, okay? Some of the big things we should touch on first is obviously diet and lifestyle is key here. So the first few things I'm going to talk about, that's all it's going to be centered around. And the big thing is we have too much sugar and carbohydrate intake that's readily available, and we intake a whole lot more than we need. If people are sedentary and not working out, their need for fast fuel and carbohydrates goes down. But the problem in our society is it's so readily available, it's comfort food, it tastes great, and a lot of people have emotional eating patterns. And what that means is they eat their feelings. They eat when they're happy, they eat when they're sad, they eat when they're lonely, they eat when they're around friends and family they love. This is one of those things that it has to become a lifestyle. You can't just, go low carb or get your diet under control for a week or a month and think that's going to fix it. Once you get into a hole, it's a bit of a long ways out, but it is possible if you do the right things. So when it comes to carbohydrate control, you really have to limit obviously the fast sugars, the sweets, things that are going to jack up your insulin and blood sugar. If you're already at a place where it's diabetes or pre-diabetes, the carb intake should be the following. It should be maximum 1 serving of fruit a day and 1 starch a day. And now we have to talk about what kind of starches, because there's obviously fast and slow starches and things that impact us a lot quicker. So typically give people a bit of a leash with this. So whether it's a serving of sweet potatoes, yams, or rice, those are usually all I give if it's a diabetes or pre-diabetes state. So pick one of those 3 and that's it. Pick a fruit. Now it has to be a lower sugar fruit, because dried fruit and tropical fruit is out. Those cause too much of a blood sugar spike and they just have too much sugar in general. So you want to avoid things like cantaloupes, melons, pineapples, and any dried fruits. So we're not talking, get rid of the raisins and dates, and those just pack way too much of a punch. So the things you want to focus on are going to be like apples and berries, maybe an orange, and just pick one and that's it. So if you're doing 3 meals a day, you're only getting 1 serving of fruit with one of those meals, and then the other meal might have a small serving of starch, which is approximately the size of the palm of your hand with an inch of thickness, and that's it. And if you go in excess of that and you already have metabolic derangement and insulin sensitivity issues and your glucose is out of control, if you go past that, then you're just going to be chasing your tail and probably making things a whole lot worse. In advanced cases, you might even need to go lower than that. That might even still be too much for someone that's really far gone with the type 2 diabetes. So that's just a framework to follow, and that's a good place to start. Now, some things to check in the blood, because you do want to keep an eye on this, and I find the system does a pretty crummy job of catching things early. If you wait for your blood sugar to go up, it's very likely that your insulin levels have been high for a very long time, because what happens is your pancreas pumps out insulin in response to blood sugar going up, and then it helps clear blood sugar from the bloodstream. Your pancreas will work really hard to keep that blood sugar in check, so you might have a normal glucose for years, and meanwhile in the background your insulin is rising like crazy to keep up with it, and eventually it hits a threshold where it can't, and then you start to see an increase in fasting glucose. So by the time your fasting glucose goes north of 6, your insulin has likely been rising and ramping up for quite a long time. And so that's why it's really important on your annual or semi-annual blood work to get not just fasting glucose check, but fasting insulin, because you want your fasting insulin at a certain level. Should be somewhere between 20 and 60 Canadian units, maybe 2 and 6 in the American units. If it's outside of that, too high, too low, then you got an insulin issue that's already brewing, even if your fasting glucose looks okay. So you got to do both on the same draw. And typically we do a 10 to 12 hour fast leading up to that test to see where are the levels at. You can use the A1C to track your 3-month average, but based on how long your red blood cells are lasting, that sometimes can be a hit or miss marker. So it's good to take them all into consideration, okay? Because typically the red blood cells last about 120 days, so it's usually a 3-month average in people, but give or take, depending on how long those cells last, you're going to see some slight error and variation in A1C, but really that fasting glucose and fasting insulin is extremely important, okay? Regular protein intake, extremely important here, because protein is generally insulin neutral. So things that impact insulin is all 3 of the macronutrients: carbs, fat, and protein. And in this order specifically, carbs impact it the most, protein the second most, and fat the least. Now, that said, protein is a really blood sugar stabilizing nutrient, because even though it does, cause insulin and blood sugar increases, it's very slight and very steady, and that's why it's a good thing to consider. You don't want to give it too many swings to deal with. So that's where regular protein intake at each meal every 4 or 5 hours is extremely important. If you actually look at how the body responds to beef, fish, chicken, very neutral when it comes to the blood sugar. So those are awesome things to consider. I usually recommend, if it's a strength athlete, they might need up to 1 gram per pound of lean body mass. If it's someone that's not as active, they might need 0.75 grams. Now, exercise is probably one of the most critical factors when it comes to figuring out this blood sugar conundrum and getting diabetes under control. You have to remember that your muscle is the largest glucose disposal agent you have in your body, which means you can soak up a ton of blood sugar from the bloodstream just from your muscle. Obviously, insulin binds to those receptors and opens up the channels so that you can get blood sugar into the muscle. But what they've also noted through very clear research is that aerobic training, high intensity interval training, and strength training also opens up and pushes a whole bunch of these receptors to the surface of the muscle so that you can just passively flow glucose into the muscle. And this is a really cool thing, because the more muscle you build and the more strength training you do, the better and more stable your blood sugar will be. Get strong in the gym, do resistance training 3 or 4 times a week. This is huge. And it's never too late to start. I don't want to hear this: I'm too old, I'm too young, I have too many injuries. None of that. You can start at any age with resistance training and get these benefits, and it will completely change your life. I assure you that. It'll get you off medications, metformin, insulin. You can kiss a lot of that goodbye, and believe me, it's possible, because many people have done it, and resistance training is a big key in that process, okay? Get help from a strength and conditioning coach if you need to. Do this right, and make sure that it's part of your everyday lifestyle if you want to beat this, okay? Other things that are super important around exercise and meal timing. They've actually done studies on this. If you do a 10-minute walk after each meal, it's just as good at controlling your blood sugar as some of the best diabetes medications on the market. How insane is that? Because what that does is it helps support your digestion, it eases bloating, and then all the nutrients that are spilling into your bloodstream after that meal, they just get soaked up by the muscles that you're using on that walk. It doesn't have to be like break a sweat or breathe heavy, but just 10-minute brisk walk immediately after meals. Some of you might watch and go, okay, why don't I just do a 30-minute walk after dinner and there's my 10 minutes times 3 all in one. That's not the same. So it's these pulse doses, this micro walking that is so critical. Fasting is another important topic when it comes to blood sugar control, because intermittent fasting can be a big tool here. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and it can be a very powerful way to reset insulin sensitivity and get your blood sugar under control. You just condense the eating window so you have more time to fast, give your metabolic machinery and digestive organs a break, help clear out debris, settle down inflammation. It's really good for weight loss as well, because we know those that carry around more weight are more susceptible to diabetes and blood sugar problems. So it'll help lean you out. We can really only burn fat when we're not eating. So, at bedtime or during fasting windows. Otherwise, as long as you're eating or there's been a recent meal in your system, your body is going to be having to utilize and burn off that energy first before you can burn fat. So typically the best benefits are seen at that fasting 15 to 16 hour mark, okay? Which is why the 16-8 is so popular. That's 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating. And so what that ends up being is probably 2 meals and a snack in that 8-hour window, and then the rest of the time you fast. I find guys tolerate it a lot better than females, because you have to remember females have that monthly cycle with their hormones, and I have seen too much fasting in females cause thyroid disruptions and sex hormone problems. So just keep that in mind. You kind of have to try it out and see how you're doing and how it affects you, but it's also based on your overall health. So As a female, if you got a lot of other chronic health issues going on, already have hormone imbalances and thyroid issues, and your stress and adrenal system's blown, and then you want to try and throw fasting on top of it, it might actually backfire and make things worse. It might put you into a state of fight or flight where the stress on your system is too much to handle and it actually is causing problems. So in that case, I would not recommend fasting, and you probably want to focus on 3 square meals a day. Metformin, I've already mentioned a few times, one of the most commonly prescribed blood sugar controlling medications on the market, and there's a lot of problems with it. Yes, it works, it drops A1C and balances blood sugar, and there's very little risk to doing hypoglycemic and low blood sugar events with it. But that said, it causes gut issues in a certain amount of people. It depletes vitamin B12, which is a critical nutrient for energy, mood, red blood cell creation, and then it also suppresses mitochondria, and mitochondria generate energy for your entire body to use. And so those are 3 kind of crummy things that happen when you use metformin. So if you're on metformin, you need to be on B12. If you have chronic gut issues, potentially diarrhea and loose stools since starting metformin, that could be why. And if you notice your energy has dropped a little bit, well, the mitochondrial suppression from metformin is partly why. So metformin's been studied against berberine, which is a plant alkaloid. It is an extract from 4 major plants in North America that boast a lot of berberine. It's antimicrobial, but what it also does really well, just as well as metformin, is it balances and reduces blood sugar without those side effects I mentioned. Also, berberine helps activate fat burning pathways. So burns blood sugar, helps with fat burning pathways, and then also it's really good for blood pressure and cholesterol regulation. It's very easy to take. 500 milligrams 3 times a day is what a lot of the research has been done on. It can be a stepping stone out of metformin. It can also be a replacement for it, and it can prevent your need for it in the first place if you're catching your blood sugar issues early enough. Another good one for helping with insulin signaling, insulin resistance, blood sugar problems is inositol, which is otherwise known as vitamin B8. So inositol at around 2 grams a day, awesome one to consider as well too. You can even get it into kids because it tastes pretty good, and it's a powder. So if any of the kids, which believe it or not, more and more kids are getting diagnosed with type 2 diabetes these days and insulin resistance, getting this into them sooner rather than later can help reset this system and sensitize them, okay, in conjunction with the other things I mentioned. But it is one I'll sometimes either alternate monthly with berberine. So say someone has borderline or pre-diabetic, you might do a month of berberine, then a month of inositol, and kind of like ping pong back and forth. If it's really bad, I might stack the 2 together, but either way, a nice synergy happens there for helping correct the insulin stuff. And then chromium. Chromium's a trace micronutrient that if you go deficient in, will actually decrease the function of insulin. So it helps insulin do its job better at around 450 micrograms a day. Chromium picolinate is usually the one I suggest. There are certain foods that you can get it from, and sometimes people are just not getting enough in their diet, or they're blowing through more of it because they're just being hard on their metabolism. So looking to supplement chromium picolinate at about 450 micrograms a day can be really, really good too. Other things that really drive up insulin, alcohol is another big one, okay? Beer and wine, really, really bad. Alcohol in general can jack with insulin, cause blood sugar crashes, and then you're not going to sleep as well. And I'm telling you, if you don't sleep well, you're going to be insulin resistant the next day. So anything that impacts your sleep will impact your insulin signaling, which will impact your glucose, and that can worsen all this. So you got to aim for 7 to 8 hours of deep restful sleep, and alcohol completely messes that up. It not only jacks with your metabolism in the moment, but then it will impact it further into the next day because of the disrupted sleep it causes. So if you're dealing with blood sugar problems, that is the worst thing you can be consuming. It should just be water, 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 and you can't be drinking calories. You just simply cannot be drinking calories if you have blood sugar problems. Some other things and nutrients that can be helpful, because some of the symptoms that start to kick up, such as diabetic neuropathy, where you have tingling in the hands or tingling in the feet, because that sugar is starting to encroach on those nerves and squeeze them out. So some really good nutrients if you're dealing with diabetic neuropathy: alpha-lipoic acid, methylcobalamin, which is vitamin B12, and then benfotiamine, which is an active form of vitamin B1. These are all very protective to the nerves and can help reverse diabetic neuropathy. So if you're dealing with tingling in any areas of your body that could be from diabetes, and you've been told that and nothing's been suggested, you need to consider adding those things, okay? Vitamin B1, B12, and alpha-lipoic acid. You can do them as shots and injections, the B1 and B12, and then the alpha-lipoic acid is typically 300 milligrams a couple times a day. We do the B shots all the time, so if people are dealing with that, a cc of B1 and B12 into the shoulder, if few times a week can be really, really helpful. And then vitamin and mineral infusions as well, because then you can really customize the bag and add some glutathione and get all those nutrients really high. You can put chromium in there too to really pump their system full of it, because if there's deficiencies on board and sugar starting to squeeze out areas, whether it's the eyes, nerves, or kidneys, then you got to get on its stat, because those are organ systems you don't want to lose. You really, really need that to be functioning well, to have a good, long, healthy life, okay? So if you're dealing with diabetes or blood sugar issues, or know someone that is, and you have more questions, just drop a comment below. Or if you think someone would benefit from this video, please share it with them. And as always, thank you for watching.